Hello everybody, I'm Colin D. Ellis and welcome to the Culture and Coffee podcast, where every episode I discuss a new topic of workplace culture and provide some insights and some practical things for you to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe and to share with people who you may think would be interested. Okay, let's get on with today's episode. Hello everybody, it's Colin Ellis here. Welcome to another Culture and Coffee podcast. I have a blended coffee today. A blended coffee is basically where they take two or sometimes more, I've never seen really more than three different varieties of beans and blend them together, as the name suggests, to produce a different flavour profile. There's a science to it. It's not just let's just lash these together. There is a science to it, and this is called a Groover blend from Sacred Grounds Coffee, which has got a dark chocolate taste, which is very, very nice indeed. Now, today I am going to be talking about easily my most popular keynote speech right now. It's the one that I think lots of people are struggling with right now, and that is the multi-generational workforce. So what I'm going to do is, because in order to build a multi-generational workforce, it requires education. So we're going to do a little bit of education and then talk about some of the things that, you know, if you're building a culture, you really do need to think about. So why is it important? Well, for the first time, we have 4 generations of people in the workforce. Hasn't happened before. Not in a legal way anyway. Obviously in Victorian England, everyone was working. Actually, they weren't living to a ripe old age. That's the difference, right? Is that because of the cost of living crisis, people are starting to work younger and they're working later as well as they get older. Because we're living longer, frankly, because people can't afford to retire in the way that they used to. My dad retired at 52. Like, I can't even imagine retiring. I'm older than he is now. Not older than he is now. That would be ridiculous. Older than he was then. That makes more sense. So we're living longer, but because of the cost of stuff at the minute, no one's able to retire in the way that they used to, or certainly in the numbers that they used to. So we have a multi-generational workforce. Now, of course, one of the big challenges that we have within our organisation, something I wrote about in Detox Your Culture, which I provide more information about when that'll be coming out soon, is that we have lots of isms in the workforce, none of which are any good, and one of them is ageism. And it used to be that when you got to a certain age, you were kind of shoveled out of the door unceremoniously. But that's not the case anymore. And what organisations really need to do to avoid any allegations of ageism is to make sure that we build a workforce that's fit for all. So the best place to start when talking about generations is to actually articulate what the 4 generations are, because some people don't know what they are. At the end of last year, I have a management program, a really popular management program, helping managers to build culture. And I added this module to the program because, what I was finding is people don't really understand generations. And typically what we do is every generation, blames the one before it and despairs of the one after it. It's always been the way. That's always been the way things work. But 4 generations in the workforce. If you're age 60 to 78, you're a baby boomer. Really came to prominence just before COVID. TikTok has started saying, "Hey boomer," and really the inference there was people with old-fashioned attitudes who hadn't really kept up with the times. It's not just baby boomers, Gen X as well, but I'll get to that in a second. So baby boomers, so-called, which you probably are all aware of, is post-war, soldiers returned from the battlefield, and all of a sudden there was a baby boom, and I don't need to explain why. There was a baby boom. And so this generation, when we talk about a generation, it's a group of people who are united by a set of events. And this is kind of when they're growing up, not so much when they're babies, right? So baby boomers are from the years 1946 to 1964. A generation is usually 15 to 20 years. But it's what unites this group of people born between 1946 and 1964 as they came of age. So they came of age mid-60s to mid-70s, came of age into kind of adolescence, really. So, well, probably mid-50s to mid-70s along that period of time. So they were united by civil rights movements. They were, Beatlemania, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, music. It was things like it was like rock and roll, and then glam rock, early glam rock for some. For this generation, word processors started to become a thing in the late 60s, early 70s. The music of the time, the Beatles, the Doors, Simon and Garfunkel, ABBA. It's all great music, isn't it? Actually, I just picked the best ones. Everything else was rubbish. Late Elvis, not early Elvis, late Elvis. The silent generation. That was, although my dad was my dad was born in 45, so he'd be a member, if we're going by the book, of the silent generation. That was the generation before baby boomers. And he was really into Elvis. He wasn't really into the Free Peace Man. That wasn't him at all. So that's that generation. Movies, The Graduate, The Godfather, Saturday Night Fever, some great movies. So they're baby boomers, right? And these guys grew up in a world of work where you were told what to do by your boss. If you think about it, all of these men, and it was a very male-dominated working world back then. Anyone who's seen Mad Men will know. It was basically about giving orders. Because that's what the men coming back from the war were doing. They've been used to orders. And this is all important. This is really, really important that you understand this, because we have this view that there's just one way of working and everyone should know what it is. And there's not. And there's different ways of working. There's different perceptions of work. We've seen this with hybrid work if you're an office-based employee. There are different thought processes. So it's important that you keep that in mind. So that's the baby boomer generation, 1946 to 1964, ages 60 to 78. The next generation is easily the best. But obviously I'm going to say that because it's my generation. And it's Generation X. Now, very few people know the genesis of the name Generation X. And Generation X came from the book Generation X by an author called Douglas Coupland, one of my favorite authors. And the two books that he wrote around about this, kind of in the early 80s, about the early 80s, Generation X and also Microsurfs, really defined kind of the zeitgeist of what Generation X is. In the same way that the movies of the time were things like The Breakfast Club, Back to the Future, Grosse Point Blank. If you've ever seen Grosse Point Blank with the fantastic John Cusack, watched the movie about the Brat Pack last night. Demi Moore and Judd Nelson and Andrew McCarthy, who I saw in Shake Shack in LA once. That's a whole other story. But Generation X, 1965 to 1980. I joke about with my kids. I was born in 69. I was like, you weren't there, man. You don't know what it was like, the 60s. So yeah, we kind of came of age really, late 70s through to the kind of mid 90s, really. We're age 44 to 59, Generation X. And the world events that unite this generation, largely the Cold War, which then kind of ended during the millennial period. So the Cold War, the AIDS epidemic, stock market crash, that was 87, I think. Music, it was the New Romantics. It was the rise of synth. So Depeche Mode, people like that, Madonna. And then late in Generation X, we had grunge, we had Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and then we had we had Britpop, which is always, Generation X kicked ass. It really did. Like all the great music, I was really into the Smiths. They were my group in the indie scene. I love talking about my generation. But from a generational perspective, This was the Generation X started to push back on that command and control. So all of a sudden, we didn't want to be told what to do. You know, I'm speaking personally, and people of my generation will recognize this. We didn't want to be told what to do. What we wanted was to be almost supervised. I think every generation recognizes where it's got to shift to, and where it's coming from. But we were like, yeah, don't order us. You know, just tell us what you need to do, and then supervise us, check in. You know, kind of make sure that we're doing the right thing. And at this time, you know, Generation X, we started to see the personal computer. So I bought my first PC in 1995 when I was 25. It was a very clunky thing running on a 28K modem. But prior to that, there'd been the early PCs like in the UK, it was a ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64, Commodore Amiga. I had all of these things. And so really, like, they weren't very quick. We didn't really use them much for productivity. That was still the word processor. But all of a sudden, technology is starting to become a thing, and we're thinking about, how can we use this productively, even though we weren't doing it. You know, when my first job working in a bank in 1987, we implemented a new technology solution, as it was. It was rubbish, but it did the job back then. It replaced, big ledger books. So that was Generation X. The next generation from 1981 to 1996 is Millennials. Now some people call them Gen Y. We didn't really call it because people like the alphabetical. Oh, Gen X, these should be Gen Y. Then we've got Gen Z, right? But they were largely known as Millennials because they came of age during the millennial, right? In those kind of early millennial years, 99, 2000, 2001 onwards. So these guys were united as a generation by world events such as Desert Storm, so the war in Iraq. And this was the first generation where the Generation X parents were talking to them like adults. And of course, this is why we have these generational shifts, is every generation of parents brings their kids up slightly differently. For millennials, these were the first generation, like as a whole group of people. Obviously there are pockets, but things like being vegetarian, being vegan. My wife was vegetarian. She's Generation X. She's vegetarian at a young age, and that was a choice that she made based on kind of imagery about animals. And so this generation really started to become aware of it because their parents were aware of it. My parents were your classic meat and two veg kind of parents, and were very working class early in their lives. So you had everything on your plate, and your dad was embarrassed when you didn't eat everything on your plate. Whereas we were telling our kids, we eat until you're full, don't eat everything, because obesity became a thing. So they're having adult conversations. For millennials, diversity and inclusion, and again, encouraged by their parents, because Generation X females had been overlooked for years and years and years. And again, that's a legacy of the past and where we've come from, and the way that we treated women and minority groups was terrible. And so what we started to see is this generational shift, and millennials really, kind of carried the flag for it and took the banner, and they were the first ones to really start prodding and poking. Of course, and what happened then is baby boomers were like, stay in your lane, stay in your lane, stay in your lane. Generation X, we were like, oh gosh, these are causing a lot of trouble, without realizing that we as their parents were the ones that are actually educating them and making sure that they are doing this to change the world for the better. This was the first generation that really started to think about climate, because the hole in the ozone layer, if you guys remember that was the first big panic with CFCs. We started to realize that, oh gosh, we're killing our planet. So diversity and inclusion, that became the thing that really started the ball rolling, which is good. That's what we want in our workplaces. We want this evolution. We want this equity and equality. Handheld technology became a thing for millennials. We had kind of all the Nintendo devices. We had the PlayStation, was it Vita or something like that? But of course, the millennials, the iPod was the thing that really, even though, for me, I had a very early iPod, But millennials grew up with this kind of technology, grew up with reality TV. Music-wise, it was more about kind of rhythm and blues. Britney and Christina, they were millennial. Blink-182, White Stripes, it's millennial kind of music. And again, what they wanted was something different in the world of work. So whereas Generation X kind of wanted to be supervised, millennials were the first group of kids who were told that they could be whatever they wanted to be. And so this generation would be the one that would give rise to the gig economy in, the 2010s, 15s, right? That would really be driven by millennials. Because the way that they were brought up, you can be anything, you can do anything, don't let the world hold you back. I was told I would amount to nothing. That was the way that my parents' generation brought kids up, certainly in the world, the part of the world that I was from anyway. These guys were like, well, coach me, show me. Don't tell me, don't supervise me, coach me. I can do your job. Some people have this problem, these kids are so restless these days. They want immediate promotion. Again, because they've kind of been brought up that way, and parents who moan about it as managers are actually part of the problem. In a good way, because we want that restlessness, we want that sense of yes, we can do anything and be anything, but also we want to help them to understand that there's a way to do it, and there's a lot of knowledge to be learned, and it's up to them to be intrinsically motivated and all of these kind of things. So millennials, 1981 to 1986, they're between the ages of 28 and 43 as I record this. And then the latest generation is Generation Z. Somebody asked me after a keynote, what comes next? Well, it's Generation A, and Douglas Coupland, he of Generation X fame, has already written the book. I wrote the book about 6 years ago, something like that. If you haven't read it, you should read Generation X. It's great. Microsurfs is one of my favorite ever books. It really, really is. So Generation Z, born between the years of 1997 and 2012. The next generation is Generation A, kids who are born from 2013. So not yet in the workforce, 2013 to 2028, more likely. And this is the first generation where gaming as a profession, where gaming is a job. YouTubers, Generation Z were the generation that said, okay, we see the technology and we're going to use it differently. It's still got people moan. And often they're people from my generation. I have to have a word with them. Moan about, why do kids watch other kids record and play the game? Why don't they just play the games themselves? Because that's not what they want to do. They don't want to do that. Oh, the other one that really bugs me is kids are on their phone all the time. Yeah, you bought them for them at really early age. Stop buying your kids phones when they're 6. They don't need it. They don't need tech. Still, the best thing for a child... I'm child psychologist now as well as everything else. Listen, I'm really well read and researched. That's all I'll say. Is what the research says, the best thing you can do for your kids until the age of, it's either 7 or 8, right, is read to them, help them to read, and it's just unstructured play. They don't need technology until the age of 8. They just don't know how to use it appropriately. It will just become a massive distraction and everything else. Anyway, lecture over. But they're Generation Z, digital natives, right? Many of them still use it really badly. Why? Because the cultures that they come into are still managed by Generation X. There's a legacy of baby boomers and Generation X who also use technology really badly. So if you're ever looking to point the finger of blame for someone for email and back-to-back meeting, it's Generation X because they never took the time to educate themselves on how to use it properly. It still isn't part of induction programs. I worked with one team last year and I did these monthly culture clubs as part of a culture change initiative. And one of the things we did was we completely redesigned the induction process, and we trained people how to use emails and calendars, and it made such a huge difference. Now, the interesting thing about Generation Z is these are the 80s, 90s nostalgics. I don't know if if you're a parent of a Generation Z, like my kids love our music. Like my daughter loves the Smiths. I watched The Commitment with her yesterday. If you haven't seen The Commitment, it's a great book by Roddy Doyle. It's a great movie. and made Andrew Strong, the singer, famous. Great movie, The Commitments. Also, she loves those Brat Pack movies. She loves 16 Candles, which is very, very questionable. Come to that in the end nowadays. Generation Z, employee activism. So this is the first generation where if you put your values on your website and either they don't mean anything or you don't see leaders demonstrating them, they're going to call it out. They're going to push back on it. And so this is why it's crucially important that you get your culture right, because these guys understand culture. COVID-19, of course, was the big pandemic that impacted Generation Z. They lost 2 years of their lives pretty much. And they're still struggling to overcome that. Don't think for 1 minute that they're not. People keep saying, oh, these kids don't want to come to an office anymore. Yeah, it's not true of Generation Z. Generation Z feel like they're missing out on the relationships. They feel like their parents met at work or met some kind of working event. I met my wife at work. And Generation Z are like, yeah, hang on a minute, we're not socializing in the way that, all of our interactions are digital. And we think that they're happy with that, but that's not what the research shows. The research shows that Generation Z do want that in-person interaction as well. War in the Middle East has been a constant. I learned that in school when I was a teenager. But obviously it's really come to the fore, so it's quite a polarizing event and topic right now. So of course these guys want to talk about it in the way that we talked about the Iraq War and the Cold War and the Vietnam War was such a big topic. There are leaders out there going, why does this have to be a thing? Because it just does. Because generationally we talk about this stuff, we do. But they want modern ways of working, Generation Z. And yes, the Generation X tech bros are launching AI, but it's really Gen Z and beyond who will use it. And if they don't think it's any good, or if they see it taking their jobs, then they're just going to stop using it. And Generation X will largely use it because, kind of they're at the tail end of their career. So anything that makes their life easier, they'll do. They don't really care because they'll be gone in 10, 15 years, retired, or they're usually due a payoff or something. But we're really putting the onus on Millennials, Gen Z, Generation A to responsible use for artificial intelligence. Music that defines Generation Z: Billie Eilish, Troye Sivan, Post Malone, people like that. Taylor's multi-generational in the way that Taylor Swift, in the way that the Beatles were. There are very few multi-generational artists. You could probably argue that ABBA in some way are multi-generational, but only really if Gen Z kids are introduced to that music by their parents. Billie Eilish, I like some of Billie Eilish's stuff as well. So she's can be multi-generational too. This is a streaming generation, so kind of the push away from movies and movie theatres. So, Stranger Things, Euphoria, Hacks. This generation loves those kinds of things. So these are your four generations. Generation Z now are 12 to 27. My kids are about to go into university and or the workforce. But the thing to tell you about these generations is when you survey what they want from work, what are the most important factors in work, the number one important factor for every single generation is a safe, respectful culture. Safe, for everyone. 51% of Gen Zs said it. So half of Gen Zs interviewed said the safe, respectful culture was the most important thing. 41% of millennials, 40% of Generation X, and 46% of baby boomers, because they want to work somewhere that's nice before they retire. They don't want to have a dog's life. People think that money's the most important thing. It's the second most important thing. But by some way, 51% of Generation Z think culture's more important, right? Most important. And then for Generation Z, 24%, so only half as many people think that income is important. 22% of millennials, 25% of Generation X, 19% of baby boomers. Because they've got a big stack of money set aside because their property's worth gazillions now, whilst Generation Z have got little hope of getting on the property ladder. So culture is the most important thing. And of course, when you take the time to deliberately build culture, you get the culture that you choose to build. You get an opportunity to connect the generations. I'm running a culture workshop next week. I'm very excited to talk about this because it's multi-generational. There are 3 generations in the culture that I'm working with next week over 2.5 days. And we get the opportunity to talk about it, and we get the opportunity to remove the barriers to multi-generational work. Not only that, we get to define the behaviors expected of all generations, because the behaviors that baby boomers experience, that they consider to be normal, the behaviors that Generation X witness and consider to be normal, are quite different from Millennials and Gen Z. So there has to be an agreement within the culture. What are the behaviors that we expect of each other? What's appropriate? What's not appropriate? Things like gender diversity wasn't really a thing for Generation X and baby boomers growing up. It was a thing almost to be ridiculed. Obviously, and thankfully, our opinions have changed now, and you can associate with any gender you want if that's what you feel that you want to do. But we have to help each other to understand these things. That's why it's important that we talk about them as a culture, so we don't get these polarized views. And actually, what we don't get is a mismatch of values. So this is why it's important to build a multi-generational culture deliberately. In the same way it's important that you build any culture deliberately, because you get the culture that you choose to build. If you choose not to connect your generations, it's going to be fractured. You're going to get people blaming younger people, blaming older people, and using that language. So actually building a multi-generational culture, it requires education, which I've just given you some of that, and I've run some really cool exercises around that to get people to see what the differences are. It requires empathy and understanding, to recognize that if you're from a different generation, what you witnessed in work and where you came from is quite different than where we are right now. Right. And sometimes what we have to do, what the research says is that we're happiest when politics is centrist, either centre right or centre left, where we get a little bit of what we expect, but we can't have everything. But in order to correct the wrongs of the past, whatever they may be, colonialism, whatever it might be, right, is we have to swing so far the other way to correct it, and then in order to come back central. And these are conversations that we need to have. Often business leaders are scared to have them. I understand why they're scared to have them, or afraid to have them, scared to have them. And this is where they use people like me to help them have those conversations, to help them educate them so they're better able to have them. Because people are afraid, I'm so afraid of offending people. Like, why are you afraid? Actually, if you just educate yourself a little bit, that will remove all of the fear. You'll know how to have those conversations. Even for people my age, mid-50s, you should educate yourself on this stuff. So you're not afraid to say, you can't say anything these days. You just can't say anything racist, misogynistic, or that's designed to deliberately hurt another human being. All it takes is a little bit of education. And then we need to teach our managers the same skills, something I do as part of my management program, such that you create harmonious workplaces that are respectful of all generations, that know how to get the job done. And that's your Culture and Coffee podcast for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Ta-ra for now. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. If you'd like to find out more about how I can help you transform the culture of your team, head to my website at www.colindellis.com.